Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Lunch and Learn. We'd like to recognize that Nova Scotia is home to over 13 bands and 42 First Nation communities, wherein the traditional ancestral lands of the Mi'kmaq, known as Mi'kma'ki, as treaty people were committed to reconciliation action. We'd like to recognize that Nova Scotia is home to over 15 African Nova Scotian communities whose culture, heritage, and history have been and remain a key part of this province for more than 400 years. We honor and offer gratitude to those ancestors of African descent who came before us to this land. Thank you so much for attending our Lunch and Learn today. We have a very exciting Lunch and Learn today. We have Shelly Adams from CNIB. Shelly is the manager and advocacy for Atlantic Canada at CNIB. She's worked at CNIB for about 20 years. She's a registered social worker, has 2 children, a partner, and loves to listen to books as well as knit, which is really great, especially during these cold days. Hopefully, these are the last couple of days that we have before the summer. So today we have Shelly Adams who's going to be presenting on clearing our path, built-in environment. So I'll pass it along to Shelly.
Great. Thanks, Roxanne. You guys can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I've definitely been listening to lots of books and doing lots of knitting lately because it's still, in my opinion, not warm enough to be outside very much. Really happy to be here today. I just wanted to mention a couple of other things. I live with sight loss, so I have had sight loss my entire life. And I also have a guide dog, Rookie, who's sleeping on the floor next to me here on his little bed in my office. I am using a screen reader, so I have my earbud in my ear and I'm kind of listening to my notes. Some of this clearing our path stuff is a little bit technical, so I want to make sure that I don't miss anything. A lot of times I like to do kind of informal presentations, and depending on the topic, I just sort of speak from the heart. But with this one, it's a little more information that's kind of hard to memorize. But yeah, I'm looking forward to sharing this information with you. And Roxanne, I don't know if you want to put in the chat the link to Clearing Our Path. So it's clearingourpath.ca. And that is, you should all bookmark that because it is a very important document when it comes to the built environment and people with sight loss. A lot of building codes and standards don't include things that have to do with sight loss. So CNIB has created this document. I'll get into that a little bit more to help guide people when working on built environment, interior and exterior buildings. And we of course want them to have the sight loss community in mind. So I'll start out first by, I'm going to just tell you what our mission is here at CNIB. And CNIB has been an organization since 1918, so we've been around a long time. So our mission is to change what it is to be blind through innovative programs and powerful advocacy that enable Canadians with sight loss to live the lives they choose. CNIB was founded in 1918, and it's a national nonprofit organization that empowers people impacted by blindness to live the lives they choose. Our work is enabled by the selfless contributions of volunteers, innovative programs, volunteers, and donors from coast to coast to coast. So just to give you a little bit of idea, talk a little bit about blindness, and we're going to pretty much use the term blindness here, but blindness is a huge spectrum. So I'll be using the terms blindness, sight loss, vision loss, partially sighted, whatever ends up coming out when I'm talking, but those are some of the terms that we use to describe people who have sight loss. There are 1.5 million Canadians who live with significant sight loss that impacts their quality of life. And some of the most common eye conditions here in Canada are age-related macular degeneration, so AMD, diabetic retinopathy, glaucoma, and cataracts. When we talk about mobility, which I will be talking about a bit in this presentation, mobility is the ability to move about or navigate a space from one point to another. And when designing spaces for people who are impacted with blindness, it is important to understand that definition of mobility. In general, people impacted by blindness choose one of several methods to help with their mobility. So it could be a white cane. And there are 3 types of white canes. One of them is a short cane that's sort of waist height, very skinny. It's called an identification cane. And that's used by people who don't necessarily need a cane to navigate, everywhere, but they may want to use it when they are crossing a street or in a crowd or getting on a bus or paying at the cash register. Just to identify that they have sight loss. We call it the social communicator. So, a white cane, if someone sees that, usually they will kind of know that that person has sight loss. And it just takes out some of the questioning, like, why is that person not, if they're in line, why are they not moving up? Why are they not, taking the money that I'm passing them? Why are at the cashier and those kinds of things? So the cane really helps to identify that people have sight loss. Then there's I say the typical mobility cane that you would picture when you're picturing somebody with a white cane, where they're either tapping it back and forth or sweeping it back and forth. That helps them find obstacles, stairs, curbs, all of those things to help them navigate independently. And then there's also a white support cane. So just a regular, support cane that people use who have balance issues, but it is white. So it indicates that that person, has mobility issues, but also has sight loss. Some people have guide dogs like myself. Some people use a sighted guide, so a person to help them. So, sometimes when I'm out, I'll take my partner's arm instead of using my cane or using the dog. I'll just hold their arm, and there's some techniques to go along with how to properly guide someone, which we won't get into today, but yeah, so that's one way that people will get around. And then there's people who don't use a cane or a dog or a sighted guide. They have enough sight that they're able to navigate without that, but they run into the whole issue of people don't know that they have sight loss. So I have friends who will go up to the bus, and if they don't hear what number it is, they'll say, "What number is this bus?" And the driver might just point to the sign, which doesn't help them because they're not able to read the sign. So it's more of, I'd say, like an invisible disability at that point, because there's nothing sort of visible to kind of say that they have sight loss. So that can lead to some frustration, but so, and I will have time at the end for questions. But right now I'm going to talk a little bit about wayfinding. So basic elements of wayfinding include logical and intuitive space, textural contrast and tactile cues, acoustics, and color and brightness contrast, as well as signage, which would include tactile, braille, and large print, high color contrast signs. And also appropriate, well-designed lighting. So we'll kind of get into some of those topics in more detail in a few minutes. But as I mentioned, Clearing Our Path was developed by CNIB. Our first edition was developed in 1998 to address the needs for information on creating accessible environments for people who are blind. CNIB's recommendations came out of 20 years of research, providing universal design consulting expertise in Canada. And the manual has become an invaluable tool for architects, designers, building owners, planners, standards bodies, and others interested in making indoor and outdoor spaces universally accessible. So I share this document with so many people in the course of a week. You know, I'll have people reach out to me. I want to make my museum more accessible. I'd like to learn more about, you know, tactile or braille, large print, like proper signage or those types of things. And so we'll have a conversation. Sometimes I'll even go out and, you know, talk to people in person, but I will always send the Clearing Our Path link to them and, you know, get them to read through that, find the different topics they're interested in, and, you know, hopefully they're able to use some of those tools when they are building. It's of course always nice for these things to be implemented during, you know, a new build or renovation rather than having to retrofit things afterwards. That's always more expensive, and you're not always able to implement things properly after something's already been built. Um, so now I'm going to talk about design needs. So designers should consider 4 fundamental elements when creating built environments to meet the needs of people impacted by blindness. So those are layout, lighting, color and brightness contrast, and acoustics. So I'll talk a little bit about each of those. So layout, I'm going to say the word consistent. Consistency is really key throughout this whole thing. So anytime you're designing anything, you want to be very consistent with where you're placing signage, you know, all these different things. So consistency is very important. So with layout, you want to use a consistent, logical, and straightforward layout for both the exterior and interior of any designed environment. Oftentimes people want to make things look really pretty, and that isn't always the best and most accessible way to do things. Even though it might look nice, it's not always functional, especially for people with sight loss, and especially for those who have very minimal sight because they are using the dog or the cane to kind of follow different tactile cues in the environment to get around their environment. So things you want to consider with layout. So if we're talking about a building, the main entrance should be directly accessible from the principal routes of travel. So from sidewalks, transit stops, parking lots, etc. So a bad example of this would be Bears Lake in Halifax, which is where I'm located. Trying to get anywhere in Bears Lake for me on my own is pretty impossible. You know, I know I can get off the bus really close to Michael's or Costco, but getting from that bus stop to the front door of those stores, you're putting your life in your own hands and walking through parking lots, busy parking lots and all of that. So there is no clear path of travel from the bus stop to the door. So those are also things we try to educate municipalities on, or the province, or whoever's working on new builds and infrastructure. You want to ensure that paths of travel are safe and accessible and have distinct tactile qualities where pedestrian traffic crosses through large open areas. So again, a sidewalk or, you know, really high contrast crosswalks. Even I was in Europe in February, and some of the cities I was in had tactile crosswalks, which was really cool. So I knew when either my feet were feeling the tactile underneath, or I had my cane when I was there. My cane was detecting the tactile markings on the crosswalk. It was great because then I knew I was staying in a straight line. It had the tactile at the down curb and the up curb, the tactile warning surface indicator strips that you often see at corners. And so, you know, that was amazing. There was a lot of amazing stuff in Europe that we don't do here, but anyway, that was really great because it really kept you in line with your path of travel, having that tactile crosswalk. And of course, open large areas are hard to navigate when you can't see because if you don't have something to kind of follow along, or you have your cane touch, or have my dog like walk along a curb or something, it is very confusing and disorienting, especially if it's loud and busy. Distinct color contrast should also be used between paths of travel and adjacent ground surfaces. So, having like a yellow paint at the ramps and the curbs and things like that are really important. But also keeping those uh, keeping that paint, it gets faded. So making sure that as soon as it's faded, it's painted again so that people can use it as a visual cue. For interior, reception areas should always be located near the very front of the building. It is way easier when I walk into a building and, there's somebody, a counter close by, and, people see you come in and say, oh, hi, how are you today? Than walking into a building and just having no clue where the counter is. So having to, it's just more uncomfortable. So it makes sense to have that reception area right as you walk in, as close to the front door as possible. Lighting. So for most people impacted by blindness, good lighting is the most important tool in the built environment because it helps reveal most of the key areas in the space, such as signage and stairs. So if you've got really good lighting, for a lot of people who have some sight, they of course everyone's different, but it helps with being able to locate the stairs or different signs, read signage and stuff like that. Everyone is different, so there are people who don't like a lot of light. There's people who are very sensitive to light, and then there's people who need as much light as possible. So there's no set standard for lighting, but just making sure that that you are using good lighting. And Clearing Our Path does have some guiding principles to help on that. So they have a list of minimum lighting requirements. They have a list of the different types of good lighting styles, and placement of light fixtures. So I'm just giving you a brief overview of Clearing Our Path today, but there's a lot more information that is provided in the document.
Shelley,
Well, it's actually a web. Yeah.
there's a question here uh, from Megan Murphy asking about pot lights and wondering if pot lights are better than other types of lights.
That's a good question. I can't remember what's in the Clearing Our Path. You'll have to check. I know in our office, in our old office, we had um, pot lights as an option that dim, and then we had just the regular fluorescent lights. And oftentimes we would put the pot lights on, and that was mainly those of us that are kind of light sensitive. Like normally I'm sitting in my office here with no lights on at all. I figured I should turn them on for this, but for me, lighting it's just so bright because I do have a little tiny bit of vision and it's just really bright. So again, I think I don't know what the recommendations are in Clearing Our Path, but there'll be stuff in there, Megan. So yeah, check that out.
Thank you.
Like I said, lighting is so individual. So all we can do is kind of give some tips. And again, you're not going to please everybody because even in our office here, we have people who wish all the lights could be off and people who need all the lights on. And it's like some days we're like, do you mind if I turn this one off and leave that one on to try to make a compromise? So yeah, it just depends, but there will be information there. So next, color and brightness contrast. So the role of color and brightness contrast is integral to how people negotiate and understand the built environment. So color contrast is the degree of difference between one color and another on the color wheel. The more visually different the colors, the greater the contrast. So we've done some research on, having a black sign with white lettering, or a white sign with black lettering, or black on yellow, or vice versa, because those are very different colors. You don't want to be making signs that have, yellow on pale blue or something like that. Again, they look pretty, but they're just hard for people to read. And not just people, that we talk to who have sight loss, but even I've heard lots of people struggling with reading packages and signs that have very low contrast. So a lot of the things that we recommend aren't just going to be helpful for people with sight loss, but also, other people in the community as well. Brightness contrast, also known as luminance, is the difference between the brightness between one object or surface and another. So the greater the difference in brightness level, the greater the contrast. Acoustics is another one, and this is one that I haven't really thought too much about. It's interesting when we have acoustics conversations, because I don't think I realize how much, I know I use my hearing a lot. Obviously, it's kind of like replacing my vision, so I am using my hearing a lot, but you don't always realize how much you use your hearing, or how much acoustics make a difference. I know when I'm getting close to a bus stop, or like a bus shelter, you can kind of hear the change in the air when you walk past a building or something. Like it has a different sound, and people may not notice that, but next time you're out, just kind of think about when you're in an open space versus, now I'm in an open space, I'm crossing a street, and now I'm walking past a building. Just sort of, paying attention to how different it does sound. Sounds can give a person useful information about a space. So again, I'm using my own examples because it's just easier to kind of relate to that. But there's a bus stop that I take sometimes, and the bus shelter and the stop are kind of like mid-block. So I'm usually kind of, and it's an open space all the way along until you get to the bus shelter. So I'm always sort of listening for that more quiet sound as I come to the bus shelter, and then I know that I'm at the bus stop. So yeah, it's interesting how that whole thing works. Also, when I'm at a pool, like when my daughter wants to go swimming, I just kind of cringe, because the acoustics at public pools is so bad. Like all I hear is just kids, like an echo and everything, and it's very disorienting. So just thinking about those different things when you're planning a space. Like I said, it can give people useful information about a space. People impacted by blindness may snap their fingers or tap their cane or make some other kind of noise to listen for reflected sound. It's called echolocation. It's not something that I've ever done, but it's quite interesting. There's some YouTube videos on echolocation if you want to look that up and kind of see how that works. Inappropriate high, so this is kind of what I was talking about with the pool, inappropriately high of reflective and ambient sound, which we call sound glare within an environment, can lead to sound masking. So if you're using your ears to try to hear where someone is or something is, or kind of like where you're going, if there's a lot of extra noise, it's going to mask the things that you're trying to kind of listen for, to figure out where you are and orientate yourself. So yeah, acoustics is an interesting part of this whole thing. So elements of the built environment that we're going to talk about. So many things to consider when you are creating and developing indoor and outdoor spaces. Some of the key elements are paths of travel, street crossings, transit facilities, and landscaping. So paths of travel, and I might be repeating myself a little bit here, but an accessible path of travel should ideally be straight with turns as equal to 90 degrees as possible, and ensure the path surfaces are firm, stable, slip resistant, and free of glare. You want to avoid using heavily word here. Heavily patterned surfaces, because that can be really confusing to someone too. If there's like a really colorful, busy design on the floor, it can really disorient somebody when they're trying to kind of get from A to B. Street crossing. So street crossing routes should be configured to limit exposure to vehicular traffic by following the line that is perpendicular to the vehicular route being crossed. So crossing should be fully outside the turning lanes, bus lanes, and all of that. Even bike lanes, that's a whole other conversation, but and have curved ramps or depressed curbs which lead people directly into the crossing area. So just to talk about that a little bit, sometimes when people are creating the curb cuts at corners, the best thing is, and again, there's way more information clearing our path on this, but the best thing is to have it so as the person is walking in a straight line and they get to the corner, they should be lined up so that, and usually like a lot of them, at least in Halifax, we have a lot of those tactile, we call them twizzies, but the tactile strips at the corners. So we're often talking to the city about, you know, please make sure these are placed properly, obviously for people in wheelchairs, but also people with sight loss, because if I walk up to a corner and I have to now, you know, move over 5 feet to press the button for the accessible pedestrian signal, and then try to get myself back to the spot where I'm supposed to be standing, you could end up getting like lining yourself up improperly and possibly not crossing the street straight, which is a scary feeling. With my dog, he's really good about lining us up and doing all of that. But if you're using a cane, it can be nerve-wracking if you have to kind of step away from that that path of travel to press the button and then come back. And then sometimes the curb cut, it isn't in direct, like it's not directly lined up with the crosswalk. So if people can see that, they're fine. They can go down the little ramp, get themselves back on track. But if not, it can be pretty scary to end up, you know, out in the middle of an intersection. So if all possible, we want to have those curb cuts in the proper place for placement for people who are unable to see, so that we are not in danger when we start crossing and we're not lined up properly. We talk a little bit about transit stops. So they should be located on an accessible route and have a marker pole that's identifiable. So visually and tactilely. So it would be nice if bus poles were different than, you know, utility poles, things like that. Sometimes bus signs are on utility poles. So it just makes it hard when people are learning their routes, because there's not consistency. So if you don't know where your bus stop is, or if I'm walking along Spring Garden and, you know, I'm not at a bus stop that I'm familiar with, then I'm probably just going to continue going until I get to a bus stop I'm familiar with, instead of just being able to stop along the route and just catch a bus at a different stop, because there's nothing to tell me there's a bus stop there tactilely. there's no way of me knowing like, oh, is this pole the bus stop? Like yeah, it just makes things hard for navigating. So um, we are working, at least here in Halifax, on creating new signage and having some tactile markings on the sidewalks that would identify that you're at a bus stop. So that's pretty exciting. But yeah, there's lots of things that can be done, but it's just so far there's not a lot that has been done to make bus stops more accessible. So
Shelley,
bus shelters are typically, oh yeah, go ahead.
oh, sorry, Julie speaking. I have a question about that and
Yeah.
technology. Like, to me, it seems like there might be a good opportunity to create apps to help
Mm.
people with vision loss to find bus stops, transportation, things like that. Is that like, do those things exist? Do we know if they're in the works? Like,
Um, there n- nothing around here that we can use to really help us find our bus stops at this point. Um, Definitely there's some stuff in the works, but just nothing really accurate yet. So
okay.
yes, it's a really I with technology these days, it's definitely something that could be done.
Mhm.
Um, it just isn't to my knowledge at this point, at
Are
least
there,
not in.
sorry, are there any partnerships with CNIB and Peach? The
We
plant,
have worked with Peach in the past. I believe it was to do with some signage and stuff. I don't know if there was any technology, but we have worked with Peach. Not for a
okay.
while, but yeah.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking, like everything that you've talked about, uh, nightmares basically of trying to get around, like even where your office is in Bears Lake, and trying to find your way from the bus stop through the open spaces and the parking lots and like that. I don't, I can't even imagine.
It's
Um,
very mentally exhausting to have sight loss because
mm,
it's almost like every time you step out of the door, you don't know what to expect. And I mean, I'm very comfortable with certain routes, but even then, it's like, okay, well, now if there's snow on the ground, like I
yeah.
can't feel those tactile markings, or I can't feel the little slant where I know my bus stop is, or you know what I mean? Like,
Mm.
there's just, yeah,
Yeah, and these are
mental
all
fatigue is real.
really important things for municipalities to consider, especially when they're designing, new new buildings or adding in subdivisions and sidewalks and roadways and just, like navigating their communities. And a lot of the smaller communities don't also have planners on site. So, I
Yeah.
mean, I guess this is where I was thinking back to Peach and
Mhm.
opportunities to collaborate on uh, ways to find solutions for some of these problems, and also just, from that bottom up education piece too, so
Mhm.
that
Yeah,
everybody's
for
working
sure.
with the same knowledge.
Yeah, Julie, if you have I had a contact for Peach, but it's been a couple years, so if you have a contact that you can share with me, that would be great.
Sure, yeah. And Roxanne and I don't know if anybody else on the call was in attendance, but Roxanne and I attended virtually the RHF conference. And
Okay, yeah.
I think is it the director from Peach who presented, Roxanne?
Yeah.
But maybe we could circle back. We'll connect us all through email and have a
Mhm.
conversation because I think that would be really
Yeah,
helpful. Yeah.
that would be.
They had some great speakers and facilitators at the conference itself. And one of the things they talked about was transportation. And that was like one of the main kind of topics. And they had a full session on it. And they also mentioned sidewalks as a huge barrier for a lot of people. And one of the things they implemented was the heated sidewalks. where the sidewalks would be
Oh,
heated during snow. And I know
I've
like
heard of
Nova,
those.
yeah, and I know
Yeah.
Nova Scotia is pretty small and the lack of funding for this, but those are some really great ideas to even think about for just our future.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. Transportation's a big
Mm.
one, which when I talk to you guys in a couple weeks, I'll be talking a bit about transportation. But I just had one more little thing I wanted to bring up before we open up for questions, and it's about landscaping. Which again, you don't always think of as being, a barrier, but sometimes it can be, but sometimes it can also be a great way to um, to be effective uh, with navigation. So an example of that would be bushes planted on each side of a building named doors. Um, so that can like help somebody kind of figure out, okay, I'm getting close to the doors, whether they can smell the plants or they can sort of tell by the sound, like I said, with acoustic. Um, just it's a good landmark. When it's not a good landmark, and I haven't noticed this in anywhere that I've been in Nova Scotia, but I know in Charlottetown, I always bring this up because it's so mind-boggling to me why they would have done this, and I've talked to them about it too. They built planters around poles that you need to press the button to cross the street. So for someone in a wheelchair, for one thing, they can't reach the button. Uh, for another thing, in the winter, because I've been over there in the winter, and they just pile up with snow, so you can't even find the button. Um, so things like that is not helpful. Putting a planter around a pole that has the button to press to cross the road, not a good idea. But if you're putting it sort of along a trail or something like that, or a walkway, it's great as long as you know, uh, they're maintained. So if you've got like a hedge, you want to make sure that's maintained so it's not getting unruly and out in the middle of the walkway or the sidewalk or anything. Um, but yeah, so other ways that it can negatively impact, um, well, sort of what I said, but just encroaching on the walkways, that can lead to some shadowing, which can be hard for people to navigate through. But also in the winter, if there's lots of shadows from bushes, it could, the ice and the snow may not melt as quickly as other places, so it's going to cause some ice and some unsafe conditions. So ongoing maintenance is really important when you've got landscaping and bushes. And then for buildings, it's nice if you can provide to accommodate guide dogs and service dogs, um, a nice little grassy area or a little sort of gravel area that's easy to get to for people who need to relieve their dogs, and also having a very easy to find garbage can for the disposal of waste, because there's been a lot of times where I've relieved my dog, um, and I'm going to get on a bus and I'm not taking the bag on the bus with me because that's gross. And, I don't know there's a garbage can or there isn't a garbage can, and I leave it. And I see people sometimes on social media, not pertaining to me leaving a bag, but other people leaving bags. And I think you guys don't understand the situation that person could have been in. Like, it could have been me who left that bag there, because I wasn't going to get on the bus with a bag of dog poo. Like, it's just not, I will not do that. So sometimes it just, having garbage cans placed in really easy places, especially if it is sort of a designated area to relieve dogs, is really important. So, um, yeah, I always have to end on a dog thing because I have a dog and he's great, but there's lots of times we've had to do that, and it's it's not the best feeling because I don't want to be littering or leaving it around, but I also, like I said, I'm not taking it on the bus with me, so sometimes it happens. Um, yeah, so that's kind of all I was going to say, just an overview, a lot of information, but an overview of clearing our path. And again, there's a ton more information on the website, and it is quite easy to navigate. So,
Mm.
and we are constantly updating it. It's gone through a bunch of versions since 1998. The last version, I think, we've just been updating it over the last few years, based on a conference that we had here in Halifax and feedback from different industries and stuff. I don't know if people were at that conference. Can't remember what it was called, but yeah, so that's kind of it for clearing our path and the built environment. There's so much more to it, but like I said, feel free to check out the website. And also, if you ever have any questions, you can always contact me, or if you ever want a presentation for your staff or anything like that, I can always provide that.
Thank you so much, Shelley. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts about today's presentation?
There's a couple of comments in the chat. Another one from Megan who said she has a friend who is blind who had 5% tunnel vision. Oops, I just and couldn't see bus signs because they were on a pole up high, like they were up too
Yes.
high. So again,
Yep.
moving the signs closer to the ground would be helpful.
Yeah. And it's interesting, some of the feedback we've gotten on that is, vandalism and all these different things. And I think lowering the signs, and we do have one bus stop. Where is it? It's near St. Mary's, Inglis and something near St. Mary's. I can't remember exactly. Right now, though, there's one that we're piloting, and it has like the lowered bus sign with the braille and all the things and all the tactile markings and everything. So we're encouraging people to go down and check that out. But hopefully, if we'll get good feedback on that, and we've been part of those conversations, and we'll see that happening more and more throughout, at least throughout HRM, and then hopefully being adopted by other municipalities as they have bus stops that are being redone or receive money, which would be nice to make bus stops more accessible. So yeah, there are some guidelines about that and the height and everything. But yeah, it's really hard to see those signs if they're too tall.
That's great.
Ooh, I don't
Megan
know what
also.
a sensory path is. Sorry, I just heard a
Oh
message.
yeah. Uh,
I don't know
Megan
what.
also says, thank you, Shelley. The presentation was very informative and helpful. Yvette had a question and asked if you found salt a barrier for your dog.
Oh, yeah, he doesn't like salt when it's wet. So if it's been a couple days and the salt is kind of dried up, he's fine with it, but he does not like wet salt. But he also doesn't like to wear booties, so I just have to like make sure I'm kind of, as we're walking, sometimes he'll lift one paw, and then we'll walk a few more feet and he'll lift another paw, and I have to wipe them off. And then as soon as we get where we're going, I make sure that, we go and do a good thorough wipe of his
Mhm.
paws. But yeah, it is hard on him, but there's nothing we can really do about it. And he won't wear the boots. Everybody's like, why don't they wear boots? Why doesn't he wear boots? I'm like, he will not walk with the boots on. So he has to deal with the burning salt,
Aw.
unfortunately.
And then, yeah, Christina had the question about sensory paths are common now in recreation and school hallways. Do you find these paths in particular a barrier?
Yeah, I don't know what the sensory I don't know what those are. I haven't heard of them. I don't think,
Yeah,
unless
so
mm,
it's like colorful shapes and paths that are in hallways. I know the neurodivergent community is pushing these just for movement in the hallway in between
okay.
classes. So
Right, yes.
I was just thinking when you had said that about the colorful
Mm,
space and on the floor and
yeah.
just reminding me
It's
of
so hard. Yeah, I think for people with certain types of eye conditions, that would be very distracting for them and difficult to navigate. And it's so hard to not one size fits all, right? So it's like we have to, we have to learn how to compromise and all of that. So
Mm.
that's a hard one because that's really great for those kids. May not be so great for some of the kids who can't, have some sight loss and it just makes them very distracted. It may even, not be great for other kids with other disabilities too, depending on what they are. So it's hard to know. Yeah, there's always conflicting or competing issues and like universal design, we use that term, but really I, I don't, there's no such thing to me as universal design because not one size doesn't fit all. So
Mm.
any other questions?
Yeah, I'm still, my mind is still going to navigating outdoor paths and how to get from one place to the other and the planning piece. And um, does CNIB present to like planners at their conferences? Like what, how do we, how do we get this
Yeah,
information
I mean,
more widely integrated?
that's the thing. And I was talking to someone about this clearing our path the other day. We were talking about bike lanes and we don't have anything in there about bike lanes yet. So we're trying to develop something right now. I have some Dow Med students working on a little project and, it's like, there's no consistency with bike lanes in the city. There's no consistency with anything really, and it's frustrating. But clearing our path is not a set of standards, right? It's just a guideline. So I wish that we could, and I'm gonna ask people higher up than me at CNIB, like, and I'm sure we've thought about this and tried before, but how can we make some of these things part of the standards? Like, and honestly, I haven't read the built environment standards yet for Nova Scotia, so I really have to do that soon. Um, but like, well, I did read a summary of it, and I thought there's still things missing, that it would be great to have as part of standards, but and building code and all of that. How do we make some of these things, regulations instead of just nice to haves? But all we can do is continue to give examples of, challenges and solutions and lived experience. And so, yeah, we definitely want to talk to as many people as possible about a lot of these things so that they can have them top of mind when they are planning different aspects of the built environment.
Great. I think we have one more comment over here. Yvette said, I have Paw Thaw at home, but not a lot of public spaces uses it, but might be a cost issue as well.
Is that a type of salt that's like good, like okay to put on your driveway for dogs? I don't know what that is.
Yeah, I think it is. I think they're like little blue colors, and it's Yvette says it's paw
Right.
friendly and nice smell too.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that would be really great if municipalities would adopt that, not just for guide dogs and service dogs, but
Hmm.
all dogs, right?
Mhm.
But yeah, I'm gonna write that name down and keep it look into that a little bit more. Thank you.
I have one more question about relief stations for dogs. You see
Hmm.
them pretty regularly in places like airports now.
Yeah.
Um, are there places that you would recommend municipalities consider for relief stations for guide dogs that there are currently where there currently are none? Um, I'm thinking about community centers in larger
Yeah.
places, but yeah, are there
I,
spaces and places that would be helpful that currently don't exist?
I think places like that, even malls, like you said, like anything that's a big structure that could have, because guide dogs aren't. There's lots of probably municipalities where there are no guide dogs that exist, but
Mhm.
that doesn't mean that we don't do it, right? So Because if we've had people say to us, well, we're not going to put in an audible pedestrian signal there because we've only had one person, or nobody in that neighborhood's blind, or like those kinds of things. So I don't want to say anything like that. But I do think in those bigger spaces, like a community center, mall, places like that, it would be really helpful, like Canada Game Center, like those types of places, to have a designated spot. And it doesn't have to be big, and it doesn't have to cost really any money. It's just making sure that there is a space that's easily accessible for people. Because, usually when I'm out, it's just grass, so I'll just take them wherever. But then it's that whole, well, where's there a garbage can if I need
Right.
it, or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think for those bigger places, like that, there should definitely be a designated spot, and it doesn't even have to be fenced in or anything. Just a known spot in an easy location. Don't send me around the back of the building across the parking lot to take my guide dog to go to the bathroom. Like
Mm.
it needs to be somewhere that's easy to get to.
Great. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions? Shelley, just wanted to express our sincere appreciation for your presentation on clearing our path built environments. Your insight on creating accessible infrastructures were very informative, and just kind of the comprehensive discussion we've had about like transportation solutions, which has like emerged in some of like our accessibility plans, is really important. Office spaces considerations, including lighting, sound optimization, and tactile elements. And also thinking about city infrastructure as well and the development of it, and how do we have a mindset and keep that as a core principle with accessibility in mind, and also technology integration to enhance accessibility. And I'm sure over the next couple of years, that's going to advance as we see some of our bigger provinces in Canada implement technology
Yes.
as part of it. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your expertise and your contributions on the ongoing efforts to creating a more accessible community.
Thanks for having me.
Always lovely to have you. Next Wednesday, we're going to be having Corey Melanson. She's from Sea Change Collab. They'll be presenting on accessible meetings and events. So that's going to be happening next Wednesday, April 16th from 12 to 1. So thank you so much for attending our Lunch and Learn. And just also like to mention that this Lunch and Learn is also funded by the Accessibility Directorate as well. Thank you, and I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you. Bye.